February 24th, 1986. The Los Angeles Police Department discovers the lifeless body of 29-year-old Sherry Rasmussen, scarred with severe injuries and tragically sprawled on the floor. Inside the house, the scene was chaotic. Furniture was tossed around, stereo equipment ripped from the walls, and a shattered porcelain vase spoke of the violence inflicted upon Sherry. For detectives, everything points to just one theory: a robbery that had turned deadly. Beneath the surface lay a truth which the autopsy reports were telling a different story. Something strange caught their eyes: a bite mark on Sherry's left arm. What exactly happened to Sherry? Was it truly just a robbery or a revengeful motive behind her tragic death? In May 1984, Sherry met a guy named John Rutin. They clicked right away and began dating. A year later, they decided to tie the knot, and John moved into Sherry's apartment. February 24th, 1986. John left their condo on Balboa Boulevard to go to his new job. Meanwhile, Sherry was supposed to give a motivational speech at work that day. Around 9:45 a.m., a neighbor noticed something odd. John's garage door was open, but there was no sign of any car. Before leaving, John had made sure all the doors were closed, so this was quite unusual. About 15 minutes later, John called home, but no one picked up. He figured maybe Sherry had gone to work, so he shrugged it off. But as the day went on, his calls continued to go unanswered. John started to wonder. However, after checking in with Sherry's secretary and learning she hadn't shown up for work, John's worry meter spiked. Meanwhile, Sherry's sister, Teresa Lane, also reached out, calling her office around 10 a.m. A twist in the tale emerged when a maid cleaning a nearby unit reported hearing what sounded like a heated argument, followed by a loud thud around 12:30 p.m. When John arrived home from work at 6 p.m., he sensed something wasn't right. The garage door, usually closed, was wide open, and Sherry's BMW, the one he had given her as an engagement present, was nowhere to be seen. Considering Sherry's earlier plans, it seemed odd that she would have left without telling him. As John walked closer to the garage, he spotted scattered pieces of broken glass and quickly realized where they came from. Above the garage was a small balcony and its glass door had been smashed. John stepped into the house through the garage. There lay Sherry, sprawled on the floor with her body horribly injured. Her eyes were swollen and she had cuts and bruises all over her body, even on her head and neck. By the time John found her, she had been lying there for a while and her body was stiff and cold. John desperately searched for a pulse and tried to revive her, but sadly, there was no response. Panicked, he dialed 911 and soon enough, the police and paramedics rushed to the scene. As the detectives combed through the crime scene, they were met with utter chaos in every room. Furniture was tossed around and it was clear there had been a violent struggle. A broken porcelain vase hinted at the severity of the attack on Sherry. Adding to the eerie scene, they discovered a handprint of blood near the alarm system the couple had recently installed. It seemed Sherry had desperately tried to trigger the alarm to let someone know she needed help, but tragically, she couldn't quite reach it in time. Inside the house, it was clear that the struggle had been intense, especially in the lounge room. The detectives found tall stereo speakers, one of which had been ripped from the wall and left on the floor near Sherry's body. As they continued their investigation, they collected more evidence from both the scene and from Sherry's body. They dusted for fingerprints around the house and also used an assault kit to gather swabs from the bite marks they found on Sherry's arms. The detectives also discovered abrasions on Sherry's wrists, which suggested that she had been tied up with a rope or cord, which they found near the front door. It was clear she had fought so hard that her fingernails broke off in the struggle, adding to the horror. They also uncovered evidence that she had been shot 3 times in the chest. This shocking revelation led them to conclude that despite all her other injuries, the gunshots were ultimately what caused her death. One bullet had gone through Sherry's body, leaving an exit wound on her back, while the other 2 were found inside her. It was clear they were shot from a .38 caliber handgun fired at very close range. Adding to the mystery, detectives found a colorful quilted blanket on a chair in the living room. It had 2 holes and powder burns, which suggested that it was used to muffle the sound of the gunshots. With all this evidence, the police swiftly concluded that this was no ordinary crime. It was a botched robbery gone terribly wrong. According to the police, it seemed like at least 2 criminals broke into Sherry's apartment, but they didn't expect her to be there. So a fierce struggle broke out between them and Sherry, who fought bravely until the end. Several clues pointed toward a robbery gone wrong. First, Sherry's car was missing from the garage, indicating the robbers' intent to steal. Secondly, stereo equipment and a player were found near the staircase, which suggested the thieves planned to take them before the confrontation. However, things took a deadly turn during the scuffle, leading to Sherry's tragic murder. But this robbery theory had its flaws. First, the police didn't find any signs of forced entry. This meant the criminals either had a key to Sherry's apartment or she let them in herself. Secondly, all valuable items, including a jewelry box, were left untouched, which raised doubts about the motive behind the break-in. Despite interviewing all of Sherry's neighbors, detectives came up empty-handed. While some residents heard sounds of a struggle, none of them reported hearing gunshots or seeing anyone enter Sherry's apartment. Experts also collected blood samples and fingerprints from the house, hoping to find clues to solve the case. However, DNA analysis wasn't possible at the time in the 1980s. To gather more evidence, the lead investigator had an idea. He took a piece of cotton and dabbed it on the bite mark found on Sherry's body. He hoped that if the attacker's saliva was left behind, it could be a vital clue in catching the killer. After their thorough search of the apartment, detectives stumbled upon an intriguing detail. The criminals had taken only one item, which was Sherry and John's marriage certificate. This raised eyebrows and suspicions, especially toward John, who was closest to Sherry and could have had easy access to the apartment. However, John was quickly ruled out as a suspect in his wife's murder because he had a solid alibi and no apparent motive. In fact, he was the one who informed the police about the missing certificate, further clearing his name. At the time, detectives couldn't make sense of why the criminals took only Sherry and John's marriage certificate. Still stuck on their robbery theory, they focused on finding the perpetrators. After a week and a half of searching, they made a breakthrough. Sherry's car was found in a parking lot, for kilometers from her apartment. In these incidents, 2 criminals would break into apartments through the garage, brandishing guns and stealing stereo equipment. The lead detective suspected that the same culprits might be behind Sherry's murder. They tried to track them down using witness accounts, creating rough sketches of the suspects. They also learned that both men were Latino. However, despite their efforts, the suspects were never found. This lack of progress frustrated Sherry's parents, who felt like investigators weren't doing enough to uncover the truth behind their daughter's tragic death. Nels Rasmussen, Sherry's father, wasn't convinced by the police's burglary theory. He regularly visited the police station, urging the detectives to consider other possibilities. He found it hard to believe that Sherry, who was tall, strong, and in good shape, could have been overpowered in a botched burglary. Nels was determined to get to the bottom of what truly happened to his daughter, pushing for a more thorough investigation into the case. Nels urged the police to look into John's ex-girlfriend, whom he didn't know by name because Sherry never mentioned it. However, Sherry did confide in her father about the unsettling feeling she got from the ex-girlfriend's unexpected visits. But who was this mysterious woman, and what was her connection to John? Well, her name was Stephanie Lazarus, and she wasn't just any ordinary ex-girlfriend. She was an LAPD officer. Right from the start, Stephanie developed strong feelings for John, but he remained oblivious to her romantic intentions. He saw her just as a good friend and was unaware of her deeper feelings toward him. To John, their relationship was nothing more than friendship, occasionally mixed with physical intimacy, and he assumed this was clear to everyone. Because of this, he never felt the need to discuss feelings with Stephanie or ask about hers. On the other hand, Stephanie was painfully aware of John's lack of romantic interest in her. So when Stephanie learned of John's engagement to Sherry on June 4, 1985, it was a crushing blow. That night, Stephanie dialed John's number and her voice was trembling as she pleaded, "I really need to see you. Please come over." Concerned, John agreed and hurried to Stephanie's house. When he arrived, he found her still in tears, which worried him deeply. Despite knowing Stephanie for 7 years, he had never seen her so upset before. He tried to soothe her, but before he could say anything, Stephanie suddenly poured her heart out, confessing her love for him. "I love you," she declared. "I've loved you all this time. I just couldn't bear to see you marry someone else." John was taken aback by Stephanie's confession, but he was confident that their relationship had always been clear-cut. He gently explained to her that he didn't share the same feelings and that he was deeply in love with Sherry. However, despite his refusal, Stephanie persisted and pleaded with John one last time to sleep with her. Feeling sorry for Stephanie, John reluctantly agreed, but made it clear that it would be the final time they were together, and that they could not see each other anymore after that. At this point, Sherry had no idea about the complicated relationship between John and Stephanie. Little did she know, Stephanie had more surprising schemes up her sleeve that would soon disrupt their lives. In August 1985, Stephanie made an unexpected visit to the Glendale Adventist Medical Center, where Sherry worked. Stephanie headed to Sherry's office for a private conversation. They closed the door and their discussion lasted for a few minutes. When Stephanie eventually left, Sherry emerged from her office looking visibly distressed, tears in her eyes. It was evident to everyone that something had deeply upset Sherry. That evening, Sherry reached out to her father Nels and confided in him about the unsettling encounter with Stephanie. While she didn't disclose Stephanie's name, she shared the disturbing message she received. If John couldn't be with Stephanie, then he couldn't be with anyone else either. But Stephanie's intrusive behavior didn't end there. During her second visit, she showed up at Sherry's apartment and asked John to wax her skis. Despite Sherry's objections, John complied with Stephanie's request. Sherry found her behavior odd, especially considering she was dressed in a flattering workout attire. After Stephanie left, Sherry confronted John and questioned him whether their relationship was truly over. John reassured her that he and Stephanie were just friends. However, a few days later, Stephanie returned to retrieve her skis, this time dressed in her police uniform and armed. Sherry grew increasingly unnerved by Stephanie's persistent visits and pleaded with John to put an end to them. However, John dismissed her concerns while insisting there was nothing more to their relationship and advised her to ignore Stephanie's actions. But Sherry couldn't shake off her nagging suspicions about Stephanie's mysterious appearances and how she managed to bypass the security measures at their residential complex. On one occasion, while dining with John in a restaurant, Sherry caught sight of a hooded figure staring at them. The moment she glanced back, the mysterious person swiftly disappeared. Sherry couldn't discern his identity because his face was concealed. Desperate for answers, Sherry's father shared these unsettling incidents with the detectives in the hope that they would take his concerns seriously. However, their indifference only deepened the family's frustration and anxiety. Detectives were certain that the murder was the work of the two men who had recently burgled an apartment near Sherry's residence. However, 3 months after the tragic incident, a curious turn of events unfolded. Several crucial documents pertaining to Sherry's case mysteriously vanished from the police station. These included the detectives' detailed records documenting the ongoing investigation's progress, yet inexplicably, they couldn't be located. This disappearance raised serious doubts. Was it a genuine mishap, or had someone intentionally removed these documents from the case files? The victim's family suspected foul play, especially considering the involvement of an LAPD officer in the case. However, there were no significant leads and the case remained unsolved for years. 7 years later, when the lead investigator, Mayer, retired, Sherry's father saw it as an opportunity and decided to meet his successor, hoping for a more committed approach to the case. Sherry's father requested the detective to conduct a DNA analysis and even offered to cover the expenses. However, the detective dismissed the idea, deeming it pointless because they didn't have a suspect to compare the DNA profile with. The detective asked him to move on, maintaining their belief that Sherry's case was simply a botched robbery. Meanwhile, John moved on with his life and started a new family. However, a peculiar turn of events occurred when he reconnected with Stephanie, and they made plans to travel to Hawaii together. But just before their trip, something unexpected unfolded. John contacted the police himself, inquiring about any new evidence that would link Stephanie to Sherry's murder. It turned out that John suspected Stephanie's involvement in Sherry's murder and was determined to seek justice for her. However, he kept this suspicion to himself for years and hesitated to speak about it, even though he continued his intimate relationship with Stephanie. 3 years later, she married a fellow officer and they adopted a daughter together, relocating to Simi Valley. Despite her impeccable reputation, Stephanie continued to meet John regularly and maintain their relationship. As time passed, it seemed like Sherry's murder would remain unsolved forever. However, in 2001, a glimmer of hope emerged when a separate cold case unit was established in Los Angeles to tackle unsolved murders. Sherry's case, along with thousands of others, was assigned to the detectives in this unit. Among the evidence was the piece of cotton that may have contained the perpetrator's saliva left behind after a bite during the attack. 2 years later, in 2003, detectives resumed their investigation into Sherry's case and sent all available evidence to the laboratory for DNA testing. However, it wasn't until December 2003 that a lab technician named Jennifer Francis began working on it. Due to a backlog of cases, they had to wait nearly 2 years for the results. Finally, in January 2005, Jennifer tested the blood samples from the apartment, as well as the fingernail clippings, and discovered that all the DNA belonged to Sherry herself. Now all that remained was to analyze the remaining sample from the bite mark on Sherry's body. However, there was a problem. The vial containing the sample couldn't be found for an entire day. After an exhaustive search, it was eventually discovered near the wall of a large refrigerator. It appeared as though someone had tried to remove all evidence linking to the killer, but by some stroke of luck, this crucial piece had been overlooked. After studying the sample, Francis detected that the DNA was from an unfamiliar woman. She quickly checked it against the FBI database, but to her surprise, there were no matches. Realizing the DNA belonged to a woman, she delved deeper and found a report about a third-party female who supposedly harassed the victim before her death, both at work and at home. Francis, curious about the possible connection, asked the detective overseeing her if this woman had been investigated. His response startled her. "Oh, you mean the LAPD detective?" He went on to explain that the woman in question was a former girlfriend of the victim's husband and was currently serving as an LAPD detective. However, he quickly dismissed any involvement by stating firmly, "She's not a part of this." They didn't entertain other possibilities, and after hitting a dead end in their search for new leads, the case once again went cold. Sherry's case had its share of challenges, with progress often stalled by dead ends. However, in February 2009, a fresh opportunity emerged when Jim Nuttall and Pete Barbera took on the investigation in Van Nuys. They carefully reviewed the materials left by previous investigators. With the DNA evidence indicating a female suspect, they dismissed the burglary theory and realized they needed to retrace their steps from the beginning. Nuttall and Barbera considered it a murder rather than a simple burglary. They believed the burglary was staged to divert attention from the real motive. Several aspects of the crime scene didn't add up for a typical break-in, especially one that happened during the day. Sherry's jewelry box, an obvious target for thieves, was left untouched on her dresser, so they decided to make a list of all the women who could potentially be linked to Sherry's murder. After some investigation, they gathered 5 names, including one of Sherry's colleagues from work, 3 other young women, and Stephanie. Nuttall was surprised when John informed him over the phone that Stephanie was a police officer. At the time, Stephanie had been promoted to a higher rank of detective and was working on art theft cases as part of the commercial crimes division. With the assistance of other investigators, they swiftly ruled out the 3 women from the list as they lacked motives and had solid alibis. Next, they turned their attention to the nurse who worked with Sherry. The case file indicated that there were tense relations between them, so the police discreetly obtained a sample of her DNA from the trash she discarded. Experts analyzed the profile extracted from the sample, but found that it didn't match the saliva found at the bite mark. Consequently, the detectives were left with only one remaining suspect, Stephanie Lazarus. However, during this process, the detectives and their colleagues made a pact to keep this information under wraps until they could gather concrete evidence against Stephanie or rule out her involvement. By keeping it quiet, they aimed to prevent her from preparing a strong defense if she was indeed the killer. It was intriguingly convenient that Stephanie worked in the same building and on the same floor as them. So to maintain secrecy, they adopted numerous precautions, even avoiding mentioning her name in the notes. Instead, Stephanie was simply referred to as Number 5. As they delved deeper into Stephanie's life during the mid-1980s, they stumbled upon their first intriguing discovery. During the time of the murder, Stephanie owned a Smith & Wesson Model 49.38 caliber revolver, the same type of gun used to shoot Sherry. Additionally, investigators discovered that Sherry had frequently complained about Stephanie's odd and sometimes aggressive behavior. The plot thickened when they learned that Stephanie had broken into Sherry's gated community and even into her apartment on multiple occasions. In a final blow, the detectives uncovered that just 2 weeks after the murder, Stephanie made a peculiar report at the police station. She claimed that her car, parked near the pier, had been broken into, and among the stolen items was a .38 caliber revolver. This revelation raised eyebrows among investigators, especially considering the circumstances surrounding Sherry's murder. It seemed highly suspicious that Stephanie would conveniently report the theft of a weapon similar to the one used in the crime. With Stephanie emerging as the prime suspect, the detectives wasted no time in informing their superiors. They devised a plan to discreetly collect a DNA sample from her, opting for a voluntary discard to avoid tipping her off about the investigation. For a whole week, undercover officers shadowed Stephanie's every move and waited for the perfect moment. Then, on May 28, 2009, their chance finally arrived. Stephanie and her stepdaughter popped into a cafe for a quick snack. As soon as they exited, the officers swiftly swooped in and grabbed the glass Stephanie had sipped from. Without hesitation, they sent it straight to the lab for analysis, hoping it would finally crack the case wide open. The following day, the lab delivered the results and it was a bombshell. The DNA from Stephanie's glass was a perfect match to the DNA found at the bite mark from Sherry's body. It confirmed what the detectives had suspected all along. Stephanie was indeed Sherry's killer. The revelation sent a chilling possibility that Stephanie may have been behind the disappearance of crucial documents from the initial investigation and erased any trace of her involvement. However, the undeniable DNA results left no room for doubt. With little time for contemplation, the investigators swiftly shifted their focus to developing a plan for Stephanie's arrest. The detectives even thought over the idea of apprehending Stephanie at her residence, but the thought of confronting her while she was with her husband and stepdaughter seemed fraught with risk. Instead, they brainstormed on how to compel someone of Stephanie's rank to surrender their weapon. Eventually, they hit upon a brilliant solution. The basement of the police department housed holding cells meant for temporary detention of criminals, where anyone entering had to surrender their weapon. This ingenious plan provided the perfect opportunity to safely arrest Stephanie without complications of her family being involved. Now, to lure Stephanie to the basement holding cells, the detectives devised a clever plan. On June 5, 2009, 2 detectives approached her with hidden microphones. They told her they had arrested a suspect who might have intel on stolen paintings. Since Stephanie was experienced in dealing with art thefts, they sought her expertise. Stephanie willingly agreed to assist and accompanied the detectives to the basement where the suspect was purportedly held. As she surrendered her weapon, the first part of the plan fell into place. However, upon reaching the interrogation room, Stephanie was in for a surprise. Instead of finding a suspect, the detectives meticulously and cautiously began revealing their cards one by one. The detectives began by gently prodding Stephanie's memory, allowing her to share more about her past experiences. As Stephanie confessed her connection with John, the conversation naturally shifted toward Sherry. They asked Stephanie to recall her memories of Sherry and questioned her about the peculiarities of their interactions, such as the unexpected visits and incidents that could link her to the murder. Throughout the interview, Stephanie became increasingly tense and defensive whenever questioned about Sherry and attempted to deny any recollection of their past interactions. Despite her efforts to deflect and evade, Stephanie inadvertently revealed enough information about their history. Now it was time for the detectives to reveal the truth to her. After the interrogation, Stephanie was allowed to leave, but as she reached the end of the corridor, several policemen were waiting for her with handcuffs. It was a dramatic moment, marking 23 years since the murder as Stephanie was finally arrested. Even during the official questioning, she invoked her right to remain silent and adamantly denied any involvement, maintaining her innocence. With no confession forthcoming, the detectives had no option but to prepare the necessary documents for her transfer to court. Stephanie spent the next few years in a women's prison until her first court hearing that commenced in 2012. During the trial, the defense raised doubts about the DNA test results and highlighted the lack of prior suspicions against Stephanie. However, these arguments failed to convince the court. The prosecution presented their theory, alleging that on the day of the murder, Stephanie waited for John to leave for work before entering Sherry's apartment. Once inside, she confronted Sherry, which resulted in the struggle that moved downstairs. Ultimately, Stephanie incapacitated Sherry by breaking a vase over her head before fatally shooting her. Then she staged a fake burglary scene to cover her tracks and left the scene after taking their marriage certificate. In her house, they stumbled upon a journal from the mid-1980s filled with entries detailing her love for John and her distress over his relationship with Sherry. However, there was no mention of her gun being stolen. Additionally, her computer history revealed multiple searches for John's name during the late 1990s. These findings added weight to the prosecution's case, painting a clearer picture of Stephanie's obsession with John and her potential motives for the crime. On March 8, 2012, Stephanie's fate was sealed as the jury declared her guilty of murder. The courtroom fell silent as the judge handed down a sentence of 27 years to life in prison, with an additional 2 years for using a service weapon. Stephanie was finally behind bars and John had moved on with his life. It is tragic to think that she took Sherry's life and ruined 3 lives in the process. But for what? In the end, Stephanie's attempts to make John love her were futile, and now she finds herself unhappy as well. If it weren't for dedicated detectives who took up the case, Sherry's story might have remained buried in dusty archives. But thanks to their expertise and the power of DNA evidence, justice was finally served. Sherry's parents finally found solace knowing that the person who took their daughter away from them was behind bars. Our next case brings us to Viroqua, a small town in Wisconsin, USA, with a population of less than 5,000 residents. It was in this unassuming town that Rian Dawn Blackmore was born on May 5, 1962. Her parents were Frank Edward Blackmore and Donna Reitman. While details about Rian's early life are scarce, her mother portrayed her as a determined young lady who valued laughter and enjoyed fun times with her friends. Rian had a profound love for nature and frequently participated in outdoor activities such as hiking, camping, hunting, and stargazing. At the age of 12, a tragic incident deeply affected Rian when one of her friends lost their life in a drunk driving accident. This prompted her to draft her will, expressing a specific desire to have her ashes scattered in the nearby woods. During her high school years, Rian appeared to have discovered her passion in the Reserve Officer Training Corps program, aimed at preparing young individuals for leadership roles in the U.S. military. Her mother fondly remembered that by her senior year, had ascended to the position of commanding the unit. In 1982, at 20 years old, Rian enlisted in the Army and was stationed at Fort Benning, Georgia, serving as a medic within the 197th Infantry Brigade. Her life seemed to be heading in a positive direction until an unforeseen event occurred. On the evening of April 29, 1982, Rian departed her barracks on a borrowed motorcycle headed towards Columbus, Georgia. This marked the final time anyone saw Rian alive. The day of Rian's disappearance held significance for various reasons. It was the day before her payday and just a few days before her scheduled promotion. Her commander had even intended to recommend her for further training in preparation for her admission to the military academy. However, Rian's failure to return has raised concerns, prompting an official inquiry into her mysterious vanishing. On May 3, 1982, for days after Rian's disappearance, the friend who loaned her the motorcycle and helmet noticed something unusual. The friend saw 2 soldiers wearing the helmet on a street leading from the military post to Columbus, Georgia. Concerned, the friend took action and had a police officer stop the soldiers. Both soldiers were questioned by military police at Fort Benning that day and the next day. They were released after claiming to have bought the helmet at a video game room in a high-crime area of Columbus, Georgia. On June 1, 1982, more than a month after Reen went missing, her wallet and sweater were discovered near Caseta, close to the Army post. That same day, Reen was labeled a deserter by the Army. This was seen as an unfortunate coincidence by the Army, raising suspicions about her unexplained absence. In response, the Army offered a reward for information on her whereabouts. Then, on June 28, 1982, exactly 2 months after Renee's disappearance, her remains were found near a logging road in Chattahoochee County. Investigators determined she had been murdered, having been hit by a shotgun blast. Following this discovery, an extensive investigation was launched with the U.S. Army Criminal Investigation Division and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation teaming up to solve the mystery of Reen's death. Despite their efforts, the case eventually went cold, leaving many questions unanswered. In late 2020, nearly 40 years later, Vic Reynolds, the director of the Georgia Bureau of Investigations, initiated a cold case unit comprising retired Bureau investigators. Their primary objective was to re-examine Reen's unresolved case. It didn't take them much time to focus on a suspect and establish a connection between that person and the tragic shooting. This individual was identified as Marcellus McCluster, a 64-year-old. Unfortunately, the authorities did not reveal the specific evidence that led them to McCluster. At the time, McCluster was already serving a life sentence as an inmate, having been convicted of an unrelated murder in Stewart County in 1983. However, despite his existing sentence, he faced new charges in March 2022. These charges included 1 count of malice murder and 4 counts of felony murder related to Reen's case. During a subsequent press conference, Kimberly Schwartz, the Assistant District Attorney for the Chattahoochee Judicial Circuit, discussed the uncertainty surrounding Reen's unfulfilled life. She emphasized the profound loss, mentioning that they could only speculate about the life Reen could have had, never knowing the love she could have experienced, the relationships she could have formed, or the dreams she could have realized. Kimberly highlighted that all these possibilities were tragically extinguished by a single gunshot from a cheap shotgun in the remote and obscure regions of South Chattahoochee County 4 decades ago. She also pointed out that the malevolence displayed in this case had no expiration date. In a separate statement, Renee's mother expressed her gratitude to the cold case unit for their unwavering pursuit of justice in her daughter's case. She acknowledged that while nothing could ever bring Renee back, she found comfort in the fact that these individuals cared deeply enough to diligently seek the truth. On April 25, 2022, McCluster appeared in the Chattahoochee County Courthouse. During the brief hearing, which lasted less than 10 minutes, McCluster pleaded not guilty. The outcome or fate of McCluster's case remains uncertain and undisclosed at this time. An unknown male body was discovered about 27 miles off the coast of Maine, close to the Grand Manan Banks, on July 24, 2000. The detectives were baffled by the discovery of this body because there were no obvious leads. The remains underwent an autopsy, which included the collection of DNA and fingerprints. The FBI was given the fingerprints, but no matches were discovered right away. Over 2 decades passed with no resolution to the case before a miraculous development emerged in 2023, when the identification of the human remains discovered off the coast of Maine was finally successful. The victim's family felt relieved upon the identification, but it also left them with more questions than it did answers. What vital information was discovered that allowed the unidentified male to be identified after more than 2 decades? Are there any video evidence connecting the discovered body to the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Maine where he was found? Maine is renowned for its regal beauty and quaintness. It has a charming lighthouse landscape and is noted for its rocky coastline. The Grand Manan Banks are located a few miles offshore of Maine's coast, not far from the Canadian border. The region has a history of being linked to maritime myths and legends, which heightens the already enigmatic nature of the place. Sailors and residents of coastal areas have long been fascinated by tales of coasts, ships, and strange occurrences. Although the Grand Manan Banks are in a beautiful location, They are also close to a region with unreliable weather and dangerous seas. This area should only be cautiously and strategically explored. In comparison to other U.S. states, the entire region has the lowest crime rate. In spite of its secure surroundings, the area saw a terrible incident in the year 2000. A number of human remains were discovered on July 24, 2000 near Grand Manon Banks in Maine. Local boaters discovered the partially skeletonized skeletal remains. As experts carefully removed the remains from the water, they observed that the individual was wearing casual clothing which included a digital watch on their wrist, a cozy pullover, and a blue knit shirt. Despite discovering these private items, the identity of the person, which was the most important piece of information, remains a mystery. It was challenging to ascertain the cause of death or the circumstances of the person's passing because the harsh marine environment had taken its toll on the remains. In an effort to identify the deceased, the Maine office of the chief medical examiner performed an autopsy and collected DNA and fingerprint samples. This initial attempt was unsuccessful. The fingerprints were then sent to the FBI, but no matches were found. Additionally, a DNA sample was sent to the FBI's combined DNA index system, but no matches were found there either. Investigators were able to identify the remains as belonging to a male during the initial examination. They probably made this determination based on the clothing and other items found nearby. The results of the autopsy also showed that the man had a number of severe chronic illnesses, including emphysema, heart hypertrophy, and nephrospirosis. However, despite thorough investigation, a precise cause of death could not be determined. The John Doe name, which is an enormous placeholder used by law enforcement authorities when a true name is unknown, was then formally assigned to him. Years were spent on the investigation into these human remains and their identification, but sadly no significant progress was made. Despite the diligent efforts of police and law enforcement organizations, the case ultimately became unsolved. Subsequently, about 20 years after the human remains were found off the coast of Maine, the investigation into the case was reopened. The chief medical examiner requested help from a company called Parabon Nanolabs to conduct analysis and try forensic genealogy in an effort to identify the man. Despite Parabon Nanolabs' efforts to analyze the DNA and carry out forensic genealogy testing, the mystery persisted. The investigation gained a new piece of information when it was discovered that the male's remains belonged to a person of Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry. To learn the man's name or the identity of his family, this lead did not turn up any useful information or potential sources until 3 years later, when the FBI's Criminal Justice Information Services, the Chief Medical Examiner's Office, and the Deceased Persons Identification Services Division met in March 2022. New hope was generated. To reevaluate the fingerprints discovered on the unidentified person, they utilized the modern technologies made available by the FBI. This second look resulted in an amazing discovery. Amazingly, when the deceased fingerprints were sent to the Deceased Persons Identification Services, in May 2022, the unidentified person's fingerprints matched those of an 84-year-old Philip Kahn, a retired cab driver from Las Vegas. The investigation, hopefully, was finally coming to an end. Detectives created and published a composite sketch earlier in 2019 in an effort to learn more, but unfortunately, no new details were discovered. However, it was later discovered that the composite sketch was eerily similar to the image of Philip Kahn that the medical examiner's office had released when the identification was made. Finally, the long-awaited truth came to light. When Philip Kahn's family was informed of his remains discovery, they experienced a mixture of grief and relief. They had lived years in uncertainty, not knowing what had befallen Philip Kahn. Philip Kahn was born in Manhattan in the year 1916. His formative years are not well known. Nevertheless, he had a sister and 2 brothers. He was reportedly given the last name Ehrlichman at birth, but he later changed it to Kahn because it was difficult to spell. He was born in difficult circumstances around the era of the Great Depression, but he developed strength of character as he rode the trains in search of employment. Many years later, at the beginning of the 1960s, he fell in love with Jean Oliver in Florida, and they eventually moved in together in a mobile home park in Las Vegas. Philip Kahn was well known for his tall stature, contagious joy, and affinity for warm climates. He was fondly known by the nickname Stretch among his taxi industry colleagues in Las Vegas. The challenges that life threw at Philip did not faze his spirit. He and Jen enjoyed dancing and living life as it came. Con was also an excellent swimmer. His sense of fun was further emphasized by the fact that he and his wife once appeared as extras in the movie Rain Man. In the year 2000, he was still vibrant at the age of 84. He always approached problems from an original point of view. Philip Con had an undisclosed disease, and his fantasies about receiving holistic care in Coral Gables, Florida, revealed his desire to consider non-traditional treatment options rather than opting for surgery. On July 9, 2000, early in the morning, Philip Con had just gotten out of bed and told his family something unexpected. Philip made the decision to travel alone and board a plane for Florida. According to him, he was looking for holistic treatment for a health issue that was bothering him. Days passed, and his family members, especially Jean, his wife, and his stepdaughter Judy, felt anxiety and worry. Since that fateful day, Philip was never seen or heard from again. The family frantically searched their house and the surrounding area for any signs of his whereabouts. After exhausting all options for 12 days, the family reported Philip missing to the Metropolitan Police Department on July 21, 2000. The last known information about Philip's activities, including his departure from home on July 9, 2000 and the trip to the airport, was recorded in an original missing person report. The police started their investigation as soon as the missing report was turned in. On the evening of July 9, 2000, Philip apparently left his house around 7 a.m. with a neighbor who drove him to McCarran International Airport. He told his family he was going to Coral Gables, Florida, to get holistic care for what might have been an aortic embolism. As the investigation progressed, it was discovered that Philip Con had not only mysteriously vanished, he had also engaged in a number of puzzling behaviors prior to his disappearance. According to records, Philip had not only appointed his wife, Jean, as his power of attorney, he had also sold all of his possessions, written letters, and had sent money to his sister. Also, the discovery of a new Visa credit card, which Jean was not aware of, confused everyone even more. The family was left in a state of confusion as a result of all these actions. They wondered why such choices were made. The family was dealing with uncertainty and the lack of any leads when the Metropolitan Police Department made a startling revelation to them. In contrast to the destination, Philip had initially told his family, airline records show that he had flown to New York. When the detectives examined Philip Con's airline ticket, the family later learned that it cost $162. They were even more perplexed by this revelation, wondering what caused him to veer off course. The family was also questioned by the detectives regarding his intentions to commit suicide. However, there were no signs that he had any plans to take his own life. His stepdaughter, Judy, claimed that Philip lacked these tendencies. According to her, Philip simply had made up his mind to confront and find a different way to resolve his health issues. Not me, not mom, or anybody felt like he had such desires. Judy said in an interview, fortunately, forensic genealogy enabled the identification of Philip's remains. Although the process of identifying these deceased victims can be difficult and protracted, the medical examiner's office experiences a truly thrilling moment when they can finally give a name to someone who has been without one for so long, bringing comfort to families. The importance of maintaining hope in the pursuit of justice for the unidentified and missing is highlighted by the resolution of cold cases. It serves as a reminder of the investigators' unshakable dedication to solving these cases and putting them to rest no matter how difficult the journey may be. In this instance, the effective use of forensic genetic genealogy is also evidence of the advancements in forensic sciences made possible by advances in DNA technology. After more than 20 years, the family of Philip Con received closure when it was determined that the body was Philip's. For his loved ones, it brought back memories and a feeling of relief. When Judy, Con's stepdaughter, learned what had happened to him, she expressed gratitude and confusion. Judy reflected on the uncertainty that still persisted. "We have more questions than answers," she said. With her mother, Jean Oliver, the knowledge of Philip Con's fate brought back memories of their relationship, which had suddenly ended when he disappeared. The family was saddened, but they also felt relieved because the years of speculation and searching had come to an end. After her husband's disappearance, Jean, a well-liked preschool teacher, continued to live for a number of years before passing away in December 2007 at the age of 89. She went through the typical emotional turmoil associated with having a spouse go missing. She nevertheless persevered with poise and fortitude. Jean did not let the disappearance define her life despite the emotional roller coaster she experienced. She carried on enjoying life to the fullest, savoring the memories of the life she and Philip had created. Judy expressed astonishment at her mother's fortitude in those trying times. According to her, Jean regained a sense of normalcy and carried on with her life in spite of the never-ending questions and heartbreak. Lindsay Chastain, the head of the medical examiner's office, offered her perspective on the significance of this identification. "We're ecstatic to have found him and can now let the family know what happened to their loved one. The family had suffered under the weight of ignorance for so long, but at last they had some answers. There are still a lot of unanswered questions surrounding the case," she said. Lindsay makes note of the fact that no one will ever know how Philip got to the location where he was discovered. The mystery is still heightened by this unanswered question. The family has finally gained some measure of comfort from knowing that the body discovered was that of Philip Kahn. This closes a chapter that has been open for far too long and gives it a sense of closure. What do you think about the case? What really happened to Philip Kahn? And why did he lie to his family about his journey? Let us know what your thoughts are in the comments. Two sisters, 10 years old, Catherine Lyon and 12 years old Sheila Lyon, went missing on March 25, 1975, while visiting a mall in Wheaton, Maryland. Their disappearance has plagued their community for many years and remained a mystery. Finally, after 40 years, their killer has been apprehended and justice has prevailed. Hello and welcome to Mystery Detective. Please support my channel by subscribing and hitting the bell icon for more crime cases. Catherine and Sheila were born to John and Mary Lyon in Kensington, Maryland. The two sisters also had an older brother named Jay, who went on to work as a homicide investigator. John Lyon, their father, was popular for being a radio host on Mal Radio. The family resided in a quiet, middle-class community. During a time when parents were less concerned about sudden abductions and disappearances, parents would often allow their kids to play outside. Things were easier in that era when everyone looked out for one another's kids. Both Catherine and Sheila were honor roll students at school. They kept their money in piggy banks, and like most kids, they decorated their bedrooms with posters of Kenny Loggins and John Denver. Catherine and Sheila made the decision to walk to the nearby Wheaton Plaza Mall on the first day of their Easter break from school. They had intended to visit the Easter exhibits that afternoon and eat at the Orange Bowl pizza place, which was about a half-mile from their house. They agreed to be back at their house by 4 p.m., having left home around 11 a.m. When the Lyon sisters didn't come home that evening, their parents called the police. By 7 p.m., police began a thorough search by going through every tree stand and patch of weeds. Scuba divers were sent by the police into ponds and storm sewers, as well as into each abandoned homes and buildings. The Lyons' neighbors volunteered to search in the streets and woods. The extensive search for the Lyon sisters lasted for months and attracted a lot of media attention as well as hundreds of tips. However, as tips decreased, the Lyons family began to lose hope and became desperate for answers. Witnesses informed the police that the sisters were at the mall at 1 p.m. A young boy who knew Catherine and Sheila reported to the police that he saw the two of them together outside the Orange Bowl conversing with an unidentified man who appeared to be in his 60s and was dressed in a brown suit. He described the man walking around with a tape recorder inside of a brown briefcase, and children nearby speaking into the microphone. One witness residing in Manassas, Virginia, claimed to have seen the two girls bound and gagged in the back of a 1968 Ford station wagon about 2 weeks after they vanished. This lead was later classified as questionable by the police. The incident sparked a media frenzy and led to calls from extortionists, psychics, and people looking for attention. The Lyons' home received several calls in the weeks that followed. People called to demand money as ransom in exchange for the girls. The Lyons were instructed by one man to leave $10,000 in a courthouse restroom in Annapolis. Following this, the police instructed the Lyon family to pay a ransom of just $101 in the briefcase, enough to make it a federal crime. But the ransom was never collected. A week after the kidnapping, an 18-year-old boy named Lloyd Welch visited the Wheaton Plaza Outlet Mall, where the Lyon sisters were last seen. Lloyd Welch went up to a security guard and revealed that he had been present when the girls disappeared from the mall. According to Lloyd, he saw a man who was speaking to the girls before their disappearance. Lloyd Welch's background wasn't well known. Welch was a carnival worker who hopped from town to town and was viewed as a drifter. The police interviewed him while carrying out a lie detector test. Lloyd, however, failed the police's administered lie detector test. But despite failing, he was quickly eliminated as a suspect and viewed as an unreliable witness because they felt he just wanted the spotlight to be on him and probably was interested in the $9,000 reward on the case. As the investigation progresses, a young girl who was a friend of the Lyon sisters provided another solid lead. The girl's identity had been kept secret to this day out of concern for retaliation. She claimed to have seen a man who must have possibly abducted Catherine and Sheila. She described the man as being white, in his late teens or early 20s, wearing ragged clothing with acne and scars on his left cheek. According to the girl, the man was staring at her so intensely at the mall that she felt compelled to approach him and say something. The police drew a sketch of the suspect, but didn't release it to the public. All leads were exhausted and the Lyon sisters went cold for a long time. In 2013, the Catherine and Sheila Lyon cold case was reopened by detectives. They combed through case files that contained interviews, witness statements, and sketches of potential suspects. At a point, they concentrated on the 18-year-old Lloyd Lee Welch, who made a statement to the police in 1975. Lloyd Welch described the abduction of the Lyon sisters in great detail during his interview, claiming to have seen it happen. As earlier stated, authorities at the time weren't particularly concerned with Lloyd Welch because they believed he had provided them with false information in order to obtain the reward money. While investigators kept going through the case files, they discovered Lloyd Welch's resemblance to one of the 1970s composite sketches of the potential kidnapper. When they dug deeper into his whereabouts, police discovered that Lillian Welch had a lengthy criminal history. This included an arrest in 1977 in Montgomery County for breaking into a home 8 blocks from Wheaton Plaza and stealing $580 in jewelry. He had been charged with numerous offenses, including rape in 3 states since the sisters' disappearance between 1973 and 1977. While trying to track him down, detectives learned that Lloyd Welch was in jail for abusing a child. They paid Welch a visit in jail to see if they could establish a connection between his case and that of Catherine and Sheila. Detectives were taken aback by what Lloyd Lee Welch said when they first met him at the prison where he was being held. "I know why you're here. You're here about those 2 missing kids," Lloyd Welch said. Welch was a carnival worker who hopped from town to town and was viewed as a drifter. Welch, who worked for a carnival company in 1975, visited various parts of the country and was in Maryland when Catherine and Sheila Lyon vanished. After a lengthy conversation with Lloyd Welch, the detectives identified Richard Welch, Lloyd's uncle, as a person of interest as well. They think he was a security guard in Wheaton in the 1970s. Lloyd Welch acknowledged leaving Wheaton Plaza with the Lyon sisters, but he categorically denied harming them. He claimed to have taken the girls to his uncle's property in Bedford County, Virginia, and never heard from them again. Lloyd Welch alleged that his father and uncle killed the girls after sexually abusing them, then burned their bodies. Detectives are unable to verify Lloyd Welch's claims, because his father had already passed away and there was no proof to bring an accusation against his uncle. Amidst these revelations, investigators received an unexpected call that will finally bring a crack to the case. Henry Parker, a relative of Lloyd Welch, told police that in December 1975, he had visited his cousin, Lloyd Welch, at a house in Virginia and assisted him in removing 2 duffel bags. The bags, according to Parker, smelled of death and had red stains all over them. He further said that they burned the bags in the isolated mountainous region of Bedford County, Virginia. At that point, investigators had what they needed to prosecute Lloyd Welch. He was charged by the police with the kidnapping and killing of Catherine and Sheila Lyon. Welch allegedly abducted the two girls from the mall and took them hundreds of miles away to a remote location. He then killed the girls and set their bodies on fire. 10 women came forward to give their testimony in court about how Welch also abducted them. Police were informed by one of the women, who is now in her 50s, that Welch had approached her outside of a record shop. He pretended to be a police officer and informed her that she needed to talk to him about her brother stealing a radio. She said Lloyd Welch departed immediately after she tried making a call to her brother. While Welch was serving time for other cases, he faced his trial for the murders of Catherine and Sheila Lyon. He finally admitted being guilty to the charges after the case dragged on for 2 years. The family can finally rest easy knowing that the murderer of their daughters has been brought to justice after being tracked down for so long. Police believe the sisters were held against their will, raped, murdered, possibly dismembered and burned. However, the specifics of the case are still somewhat murky. Due to his advanced age and the fact that he is already serving a 33-year sentence in Delaware for a separate offense, Lloyd Welch was given a sentence of 48 years. He will probably live all his life in prison. When the trial was over, John Lyon thanked the judges. It had been a difficult 3 years for him, his wife, and his 2 sons. However, he expressed his gratitude for the detectives working on the case, saying that they had treated his daughters like their own for the past 3 years, and for that he would always be grateful. The dynamics of the Lyons family were drastically altered by Catherine and Sheila's disappearance. John Lyon started assisting other families dealing with tragedy and loss as a victim's advocate in Montgomery County. The state of Maryland was shocked by Lloyd Welch's conviction. A typical afternoon for the Lyons family descended into the worst nightmare imaginable. The tireless detectives who turned over every stone to crack the case have finally brought some peace. On the night of May 30th, 2016, Bridget left her house. At around 10:30 p.m., she sent a Snapchat message saying she was too pretty to walk in the grass. A few minutes later, she called a friend who later stated that she seemed fine with nothing amiss. Around 1:30 a.m., a man called 911 to report hearing multiple gunshots at the park. Then, just before 7 a.m., Bridget's naked body was found in the park, not by people, but by stray dogs. Although there were no reports of the dogs eating her, they circled the body. A man passing through the park shooed the dogs away, and shortly after, Atlanta homicide detectives arrived at the scene. After the discovery of her body, the police immediately began canvassing the area for witnesses and clues. However, no personal effects were found on or around the victim, leaving investigators with little to go on besides her wounds. Now, the autopsy revealed some troubling details. There wasn't any evidence of violations, but it indicated that some of the gunshots came from a straight-down angle, suggesting that Bridget was already likely on the ground, possibly dead, when she was shot multiple times. The police say it appeared as if Bridget was running away from her killer when she was gunned down. The choice of ammunition, radically invasive projectiles, also known as RIP bullets, raised eyebrows. These bullets are designed to fragment upon impact, causing extensive damage. Their use in the crime led investigators to consider whether a message was being sent. As the investigation progressed, Bridget was identified as the victim, thanks in part to one of her tattoos, which barely read her name. Detectives received reports from neighbors who claimed to have seen individuals escorting her through the park around 11:30 p.m. on the night of her murder. Surveillance footage from a Shell gas station in Stone Mountain, Georgia also confirmed this. It showed Bridget with 2 black males who were the last known people to see her alive. One of the men with her looked to be between 20 and 30 years old with a goatee and wearing a white t-shirt. Police said there was no clear description of the other man. Witnesses described Bridget as looking unhappy during this encounter. On the day after these sightings, on June 1st, 2016, Atlanta police confirmed that the car seen at the gas station belonged to Bridget. Interestingly, the vehicle was found behind King's Southern Delight restaurant on Red Dan Road in DeKalb County, which is about 2 miles from where she was last seen with the 2 individuals, and approximately 20 miles from where her body was discovered. Despite the discovery of her car, investigators have not released any information about potential DNA evidence found inside. So who exactly was behind this? And who were those two men? Now the detectives had to understand Bridget's journey, especially after she moved to Atlanta. She pursued her dream of becoming a model and even landed a role as an Amber Rose lookalike in one of the music videos from Chris Waddle. In short, it seemed like her dreams were coming true. But there was a darker side to her story too. A simple online search revealed something unexpected. Turns out there were ads on Backpage featuring Bridget in revealing outfits, hinting at involvement in escort services. This shocked her friends who had no idea about this side of Bridget's life. Her grandmother, Beverly Toole, had a theory. She believed that Bridget might not have been acting of her own free will. She suspected that Bridget's boyfriend might have influenced her decisions. So the attention of detectives turned to Bridget's 21-year-old boyfriend, Kevin Kinney. Bridget's friends had a lot to say about Kevin, her boyfriend. He was older, had a history of legal troubles, and there were rumors that he might be involved in a gang. There were even reports suggesting that their relationship was volatile. Just a few months before Bridget's murder, she called 911 to report an assault by Kevin. She told police that Kevin hit her in the face, but decided not to press charges. However, just 2 days later, police were called to the same home because Bridget was fighting with another woman, Brittany Aloka, who turned out to be the mother of Kevin's child. It seemed like there was a complicated love triangle involving Bridget, Kevin, and Brittany. Before her death, Bridget was living with Kevin and Brittany, which likely contributed to the domestic disputes. A friend of Bridget's revealed that there might have been another major source of tension, the fact that Bridget was pregnant. She was afraid and hesitant to tell Kevin about the pregnancy, indicating it was a recent development, just weeks before her tragic death. But someone like Kevin couldn't be able to live with his current girlfriend and his child's mother without some friction between everyone involved. Now the police took Kevin and Brittany in for interrogation, but they haven't been named as suspects and no charges were filed. Brittany declined to comment, focusing on being a mother. Kevin claimed he was cleared as a suspect after the interrogation, surprising many. The police, however, remained silent about their investigation. Kevin denied being a suspect and claimed he was cleared by the police. He seemed surprised by the allegations against him. He mentioned a unique living situation with Bridget and Brittany living together. There were multiple incidents of domestic disputes involving the three of them. However, Kevin denied these allegations. He denied knowing about Bridget's involvement in the escort business, claiming he tried to keep her away from it. Kevin stated that he wasn't aware of Bridget's apparent pregnancy and denied discussing it with her, unaware of the fact that the autopsy revealed that she was not pregnant. Kevin expressed frustration, saying he wished he could confront everyone involved. He said that when he came to know about Bridget's death, he found the situation quite dramatic and took a while to respond because he didn't know what to say. He denied any harm towards Bridget and expressed his desire to marry her if she were still alive. Even though he had been cleared by the police, they never explicitly told him so. But in the immediate aftermath, police had some ideas and by his own admission, Bridget's boyfriend, Kevin Kinney, the court's #1 suspect. The next set of questions that the cops had was his involvement with gangs, to which he strongly denied any affiliation. He admitted to having served time in jail for non-violent offenses, but insisted he had nothing to do with Bridget's murder. Kevin even said that Bridget had expressed fear for her life before her death, but didn't know who she was afraid of. He also suggested that Bridget may have rejected someone's advances, leading to her murder, but all of these theories had no concrete answers. Unfortunately, with no progress being made, the case went cold for almost 2 years. On May 31st, 2018, 2 years after Bridget's tragic murder, new developments emerged, shedding light on the case that had baffled investigators. According to Atlanta police, surveillance footage captured Bridget's car in a parking lot. In the footage, a woman was seen entering a store and purchasing a Sprite. Now not far from the vehicle, near a fence, authorities discovered a dress. They also recovered a Sprite bottle. The crucial breakthrough came when DNA evidence recovered from Bridget exactly matched the DNA found on the Sprite bottle. This discovery marked a significant step forward in the investigation. But this wasn't the end of the story. As a matter of fact, the investigation into Bridget's murder led authorities to uncover another case involving the disturbing murder of an elderly couple, which happened on October 24, 2016. Sylvia Watson and her fiancé Samuel White were victims of a horrific crime perpetrated by members of the Roland 20 Street Gang. The suspects, including Christopher Crisco Spencer, forced Watson to drive to multiple ATMs to withdraw money before returning to her apartment. Once there, Spencer and another man, Vernon Vito Corleone Beeman, bound the couple and shot them execution-style in the back of the head. Christopher Spencer was arrested on November 2, 2016 and charged in connection with the murders of Sylvia Watson and Samuel White. Following his conviction, Spencer was incarcerated at Macon State Prison. It was during this time that Spencer's DNA submitted to a database, matched DNA found on Bridget's body, and the Sprite bottle recovered near her vehicle. This crucial DNA match prompted authorities to secure an arrest warrant for Spencer in connection with Bridget's murder on May 30, 2018. Detective O'Connor, involved in the investigation, explained that prior to Spencer's arrest and the elderly couple's murder, there were very few leads and little information regarding Bridget's case. Surveillance footage from the convenience store showed that the suspects were cautious, having someone else buy the items they needed without leaving the vehicle. This caution made it challenging for investigators to gather evidence initially. However, with Spencer's identification and arrest, a breakthrough finally occurred in Bridget's case. Despite the DNA evidence linking Spencer to Bridget's murder, many questions remain unanswered. It's unclear why Bridget was targeted, and Spencer denies any involvement in her death. Spencer was already facing a life sentence when he was charged for Bridget's case. While Spencer is associated with the Roland 20s gang, authorities believe Bridget's murder is unrelated to gang activity. In March 2018, Spencer faced further charges, along with 8 other alleged gang members, in connection with the murder of 2 youths in Jonesboro in 2016. Bridget's grandmother, Beverly Toole, expressed a mix of emotions upon learning about Christopher Spencer's arrest in connection with Bridget's murder. While relieved that progress had been made in the case, Beverly remains overwhelmed by unanswered questions. She wonders about the circumstances that led to Bridget's encounter with Spencer and whether it was a chance meeting or something more sinister. Despite the arrest, Beverly remains uncertain about whether it will bring any solace or closure to the family. Meanwhile, on June 3, 2018, in Sandy Springs, a suburb of Atlanta, friends and family of Bridget gathered to honor her memory and celebrate the impact she had on their lives during her brief time on Earth. The gathering served as a testament to Bridget's vibrant spirit and the profound connections she forged with those around her. In the midst of their grief, Bridget's family faces the practical challenges of arranging her funeral. To alleviate the financial burden, they've set up a GoFundMe account to help cover the costs associated with the funeral arrangements. This gesture of support from friends, family, and the community underscores the outpouring of love and solidarity that surrounds Bridget's family during their difficult times. As we come to the end of Bridget Shield's story, Bridget's memory will endure, kept alive by the love of her family and friends. The arrest brings a glimmer of hope for closure, but questions remain. How did it happen? Was it a chance encounter or something more sinister? Only time will tell. On November 28, 2003, Sherita Williams, a 16-year-old resident of Pennsauken Township, New Jersey, decided to treat herself to a nail appointment after the Thanksgiving holiday. Around 5:00 p.m., she left her home, which was conveniently just a short 5-minute walk away from the local salon where her best friend was eagerly waiting for her. Sherita assured her parents that she would return shortly, but as hours passed without any sign of her, her parents grew increasingly worried. In a state of panic, her mother began reaching out to Sherita's friends, only to discover that even her best friend had not seen her that day. The disappearance of Sherita Williams left her loved ones questioning what could have possibly happened to her. Did she lose her way? Or was there a more sinister reason behind her sudden vanishing? Pennsauken Township, located in Camden County, New Jersey, is a suburban area neighboring Philadelphia along the Delaware River. As of the 2020 United States Census, the population of this township was approximately 37,000. Known for its significant industrial park, Pennsauken houses major facilities such as a Pepsi bottling plant and the headquarters of J&J Snack Foods. The residents of Pennsauken are known for their warm and welcoming nature, creating a peaceful community. However, it is worth noting that the crime rate in Pennsauken in 2003 was higher than the national average, with 592 incidents per 100,000 people compared to the national rate of 478. Sherita Williams, a high school student, resided in Pennsauken with her family. Born on October 1, 1987, she was the beloved daughter of Harry and Wilma Williams and grew up in a nurturing home alongside her sister, Sabrina, and brother, John Henry. Sherita possessed a keen eye for the arts, particularly photography, and had a deep passion for music and dance. Monday nights were cherished moments for the Williams family as they would come together to laugh, cry, and bond over the stories unfolding on the screen. Sherita actively participated in the youth group at Ashbury United Methodist Church in Pennsauken, where she found an outlet for her strong sense of community and compassion. Sherita, a popular junior at Pennsauken High School, possessed a deep fondness for children and eagerly embraced any opportunity to babysit for friends and relatives. Her playful nature and boundless energy endeared her to the children, who adored her in return. Sherita's strong empathy and love for her community fueled her aspiration to become a social worker and help people in need. Known for her bright and magnetic personality, she approached life with unwavering trust in the goodness of others. Sherita eagerly anticipated attending college and leaving a lasting impact on the world. Despite her big dreams, she also found joy in the simple pleasures of life, such as getting her nails, hair, and eyebrows done. On November 20th, 2003, at 5:00 p.m., Sherita left her home to visit a salon located just a short 5-minute walk away. Her plan was to meet her best friend there. However, the events that unfolded would forever alter the lives of those who loved her. When Sherita failed to return home at the expected time, her mother Wilma contacted her friend and was shocked to learn that they hadn't met at the salon. This revelation unsettled Wilma as her motherly intuition sensed that something was amiss. As the night wore on, Sherita's parents clung to hope, anticipating her return, but she never came back. Unable to bear the wait any longer, on November 29th, 2003, Sherita's parents filed a missing person report. The Camden County Police swiftly initiated a search for Sherita in and around the salon and its vicinity. Meanwhile, her parents actively scoured the streets of Pennsauken in search of their beloved daughter. A phone call from one of Sherita's friends added to their unease, suggesting that she might be in the vicinity of 36th Street, a place she had expressed fear of passing through. Acting on this tip, Wilma and Harry promptly drove to the area, hoping to find any trace of Sherita. Shortly before 3:00 p.m., in the vicinity of a railroad bridge at the intersection of 36th Street and Hayes Avenue in Pennsauken, Wilmot made a distressing discovery. She noticed what appeared to be a person lying on the gravel without proper clothing. Her maternal instincts immediately kicked in, prompting her to contact the Camden County Prosecutor's Office. Detectives swiftly arrived at the scene and uncovered the truth beneath the bridge. It was a teenage girl who bore a striking resemblance to Sherita Williams. Adjacent to her was her purse, containing her identification, which confirmed her identity. Sherita was lying face up in the dirt, with her shirt torn open, pants unbuttoned, and hands bound behind her back. Although there were no visible injuries on her body, her undergarments had been forcibly removed, leaving red marks around her waist. The police had concerns that Sheridan may have been subjected to sexual assault. Adding to the distressing situation, a durac was found around her neck, suggesting it may have been used to silence her cries. Additionally, 2 plastic bags from a nearby sporting goods store were discovered lodged in her mouth. One of the bags contained a receipt for a black shirt purchased at 4:28 p.m. on the same day she went missing. The devastating news of Sherita's death deeply impacted Wilma and Harry's lives, as well as sending shockwaves throughout the community. As the police and concerned neighbors gathered around the Williams residence, those who knew Sherita expressed their grief. One neighbor described her as a kind-hearted individual who did not deserve such a fate. the Camden County Police officially classified Sherita's death as a homicide and initiated an investigation into the crime scene where she was found. It was determined that Sherita had been strangled and suffocated. Furthermore, there were indications of bodily fluid stains on her jeans, suggesting a sexual assault had taken place. Despite the absence of obvious physical trauma, no knives or bullets were discovered in close proximity. However, the police did uncover some peculiar items at the scene, including a man's hair cap and a penny believed to belong to the perpetrator. The hair cap was sent to the laboratory for analysis, in hopes of finding hair strands and other potential evidence. In order to reconstruct Sherita's final movements, investigators reviewed surveillance footage from the nail salon in Bensauken that she frequently visited. The footage revealed that she was at the salon at 6:05 p.m., getting her eyebrows done. Subsequently, the detectives examined credit card receipts, interviewed customers of the salon, and questioned individuals who may have been present at the crime scene. Unfortunately, no significant breakthrough was made, and the identity of the killer remained elusive. The detectives became intrigued by how Wilma and Harry had known to search near the bridge. Wilma explained that while she was making calls to find Sherita, one of her friends had mentioned the 36th Street Bridge, stating that Sherita had expressed fear about crossing it. Harry believed that this friend might possess additional information about his daughter, prompting the detectives to focus on this new lead and approach Sherita's friend for an interview. The friend claimed that she had mentioned the 36th Street location to Wilma on a hunch, as Sherita sometimes took that route to visit her boyfriend. Additionally, the police discovered that Sherita had made a call to her boyfriend in Camden from a nearby payphone around 6:30 p.m., just before her disappearance. The police located the boyfriend and spoke to him in the presence of his mother. He confirmed that Sherita had visited him that night at around 6:30 p.m., but he had been asleep in his bedroom due to his night shift work as a security guard and had not seen her. His mother admitted to speaking to Sherita at the door, but not allowing her inside because she did not like her. Despite tatting the boyfriend as a suspect, the detectives lacked physical evidence linking him to the crime scene, and he also passed a lie detector test successfully. Eventually, he was cleared of suspicion. Following this setback, the detectives meticulously reevaluated the evidence, with a particular focus on the t-shirt receipt found in the plastic bag. It was determined that the receipt was from the Model sports goods store in the Sherry Hill Mall. However, upon their visit to the store, they encountered yet another obstacle. The surveillance cameras at the establishment had malfunctioned on the evening of November 28th, leaving no available footage. In light of this setback, the detectives decided to pursue a lead they had received as a tip. An unidentified individual claimed to have seen one of Sherita's male friends driving near the bridge on the night of the murder, suggesting that Sherita may have been in his car. Interestingly, this male friend happened to be dating one of Sherita's acquaintances, and rumors circulated that he had feelings for Sherita. Given that Sherita had used a payphone, investigators speculated that she may have called this friend for a ride, unaware of his romantic interest in her. Consequently, the friend was summoned to the police station for an interview. Although he appeared nervous, he cooperated with the authorities. He openly admitted his fondness for Sherita and acknowledged driving her around the area on previous occasions. However, he vehemently denied being with her on the night of the murder, claiming that he had picked up his girlfriend from her job at the mall and returned home directly. While his alibi lacked solidity, there was no concrete evidence linking him to the crime, resulting in his eventual clearance. After 3 months of no new leads, a breakthrough finally occurred. The crime lab successfully extracted a DNA sample from a bodily fluid stain found on Sherita's clothing. Immediately, the police initiated the collection of DNA samples from individuals acquainted with Sherita, hoping to find a match. Additionally, samples were obtained from male suspects. Unfortunately, all these efforts failed to yield a match. Determined to make progress, the detectives took an extra step by running the DNA sample through CODIS, the FBI's national crime database. Once again, this avenue proved fruitless as no match was found. Despite the dwindling leads and the case growing cold, Sherita's parents refused to lose hope. Her father, Harry, persisted in contacting the police every week to stay updated on the case's progress. Even the police officers involved remained dedicated to finding justice for Sharita. In March 2007, a significant breakthrough occurred. For years after Sharita's murder, the police made a startling discovery. A new individual had been added to Cody's, and their DNA matched the bodily fluid sample found on Sharita's jeans. This revelation led them to a 22-year-old man named Warren Dixon, who was previously unknown to anyone involved in the case. Upon further investigation, it was revealed that Warren had attended the same school as Sharita after transferring from Camden High to Pensacon High. Interestingly, Warren, who was 18 at the time of Sharita's murder, had dropped out of school shortly after the tragic event and relocated to Pennsylvania. 2 years later, he was arrested on drug charges, which resulted in his details being entered into the Cody's database. Notably, Warren lived just 2 blocks away from the bridge on 36th Street, indicating his proximity to the crime scene. The police speculated that he may have intercepted Sharita on that fateful night after she left her boyfriend's house. Tracking down Warren was relatively easy for the police, as he had returned to New Jersey and was required to attend weekly probation meetings. They approached him during one of these meetings and requested his presence for a police interview. Throughout the questioning, Warren remained outwardly calm, although he seemed to struggle with social interaction. He admitted to knowing Sharita during high school, but claimed to have only learned about her murder through the news. However, when confronted with the presence of his DNA at the crime scene, he confessed to having intimate contact with Sharita on the night of November 28, 2003. The authorities then presented Warren with the hair cap found at the crime scene, without disclosing his origin. Initially, Warren provided evasive answers, but eventually admitted that the hair cap belonged to him. Additionally, Warren displayed an unusual level of interest in the case, constantly posing peculiar questions to the detectives. During a particular moment, he inquired, "If I were to unintentionally do this, would I still be required to face imprisonment?" In a subsequent interrogation with the police, Warren finally admitted his guilt. He confessed to intercepting Sharita on the night of the murder and making unwanted advances towards her, which she rejected. This led to a violent escalation that tragically resulted in her death. The exact motive behind Warren placing the 2 plastic bags in Sharita's mouth remained unclear. Despite a lab report in January 2009 that showed no match between Warren's hair and the strands found on the cap, authorities believed they had sufficient probable cause and evidence to charge him based on his confession. In January 2009, Warren Dixon was apprehended and charged with aggravated manslaughter in a New Jersey Superior Court. During his arraignment, the judge set his bail at $750,000. Sharita Williams' family attended the court proceedings to share their memories of Sharita and display photographs documenting her life from infancy. "I want the court to truly understand who she was, to witness her growth," emotionally stated Harry Williams. Warren displayed uncooperative behavior in court, refusing to stand when ordered by the judge and requiring deputies to forcefully remove him from his chair at one point. He remained unresponsive, only answering one question regarding legal representation. The final trial commenced in March 2011. Warren Dixon, 25 years old at the time, pleaded guilty to attempted aggravated assault and aggravated manslaughter. The Williams family was present to witness their daughter finally receive justice after 7 long years of sorrow and unanswered inquiries. Sharita's mother and Aunt Warbuttons adorned with Sharita's image during the court proceedings. On June 3, 2011, Superior Court Judge Samuel Nettle sent his warrant to 20 years in prison, specifying that he would only be eligible for parole after serving 85% of this sentence. Additionally, Warren would be subject to lifetime community supervision and listed in New Jersey's Registry of Convicted Sex Offenders. Currently, official records indicate that he is currently incarcerated at East Jersey State Prison and will be eligible for parole in 2026. Following the trial, Harry Shearer, his father, expressed his concern as to why Warren would be granted parole when his daughter was gone forever. He firmly believed that Warren should have received a life sentence instead. Despite his grief, Harry expressed gratitude towards the Camden County Police and the entire community for their efforts in bringing justice. He acknowledged that it was a collective endeavor involving the media, family, prosecutor's office, and friends, and he considered the conclusion of this saga. Throughout the years, Harry developed a connection with Surgeon Martin Wolfe from the prosecutor's office, who served as the lead investigator in the case. Whenever Harry reached out to inquire about the case or simply to share his grief, Wolfe always paid attention. Wolfe dedicated more time to solving this murder than any other case during his 17 years in law enforcement. When Detective John Greer took over the case in 2008 due to Wolfe's military deployment, Harry was overcome with emotions. However, Greer remained determined and motivated by the Williams family's unwavering resolve. The family organized annual marches to the 36th Street Bridge, where Sharita's body was discovered, which served as a source of encouragement for Greer. It was this dedication that ultimately led to the resolution of the Cole case. Harry made it a point to contact the Camden County Prosecutor's Office every Monday, seeking answers and requesting meetings, ensuring that the tragedy of Sharita's murder would never be forgotten. In a subsequent interview with the media, Harry directed his message to teenage viewers, emphasizing the importance of not blindly trusting everyone they meet, as hidden motives may exist. He described Sharita as a loving and gentle person who trusted everyone and never anticipated anyone would cause her harm. He recalled her reassuring words on the last night she left home, saying, "I'm 16, Dad. I'll be fine." Pursuing higher education had always been a part of Sharita's aspirations for the future before her life was tragically cut short. To pay tribute to her memory, Pennsauken High School bestowed Sharita with a posthumous diploma. In the serene and picturesque streets of Gold Coast, Queensland, an ordinary evening took a dark turn, plunging an entire community into a state of shock and disbelief. On the fateful evening of September 9th, 2015, Tara Brown, a vibrant young woman full of dreams and aspirations, found herself entangled in a web of events that would ultimately lead to a tragic end. As we embark on this harrowing journey, we delve into the chilling repercussions that transformed a once promising love story into a nightmare of unimaginable cruelty. This tale serves as a stark reminder that love at times can morph into a malevolent force, leaving behind scars that reverberate through generations. Throughout this gripping narrative, one cannot help but wonder how such a promising love story could take such a chilling turn. Were there any warning signs that could have averted this tragedy? Gold Coast, situated in Queensland, Australia, is renowned for its idyllic beaches, vibrant nightlife, and the plethora of recreational activities. Often hailed as a tourist haven, this coastal paradise boasts stunning coastlines, including popular beaches like Surfers Paradise, Broad Beach, and Burleigh Heads. The city is also home to renowned theme parks, such as Dreamworld, SeaWorld, and Warner Brothers Movie World, making it a hub of entertainment. Despite its allure, Gold Coast maintains a relatively lower crime rate compared to larger Australian cities. Given these factors, it is difficult to comprehend the heinous act committed by a local resident named Lionel Potter. Tara Brown, born on March 21, 1991 in Hamilton, New Zealand, relocated to the Gold Coast with her family during her teenage years. Fast forward to 2011, fell in love with Lionel John Pettier, a member of the Bandidos gang. A year later, they welcomed a beautiful daughter into their lives, whose identity remains undisclosed for privacy reasons. Tara embodied the essence of the Gold Coast, the sunshine, the golden beaches, and the tight-knit community. Growing up in this coastal haven, she developed a zest for life and a thirst for adventure. Tara's involvement in touch football at a representative level was just one aspect of her dynamic personality. Her insatiable curiosity and zest for exploration drove her to constantly seek out new experiences and knowledge. However, her proudest role was that of a mother, and she approached it with unwavering love and dedication. Whenever her daughter was mentioned, Tara's face would light up, radiating the palpable love she felt. Unfortunately, amidst her vivacity and the love that surrounded her, the shadows of fate were waiting to cast a dark cloud over her sunny days. Lionel Potter, a former member of the Bandidos gang, had a troubling history of domestic violence and criminal behavior. His journey into a life of crime began in 2009, with charges ranging from assault to possession of stolen property. Despite facing legal consequences, Pater managed to evade convictions, in some cases resulting in mere fines. Over the years, his recklessness escalated as he faced charges of public nuisance, unlawful possession of suspected stolen property, and willful damage, showcasing a blatant disregard for the law. Even probation orders did not deter him, as he repeatedly breached them, displaying a pattern of defiance. In 2012, Pater's tumultuous relationship with Tara Brown took a turn for the worse. He not only breached protection orders, but also made threats and caused damage, revealing an alarming level of hostility. Despite brief periods of incarceration, Pater remained undeterred, accumulating multiple convictions and fines. Behind the facade of smiles and apparent family bliss, a darker reality of abuse and control was hidden. Tara, once strong and confident, began to doubt herself due to pettiest threats and manipulation. Their relationship became a turbulent cycle of breakups and reconciliations marked by police interventions and protection orders. However, everything changed in 2015 when Tara made a courageous decision during a trip to New Zealand. The unraveling of her life began at the departures lounge of Auckland International Airport. She had briefly returned home with her mother to assist in scattering her grandfather's ashes before heading back to the Gold Coast, where she had been living for the past few years. However, everything took a dramatic turn during her journey. Tara, her mother, and Pedia were at the airport, ready to fly back to Australia. Interestingly, Pater had also come to New Zealand but had chosen to make separate travel arrangements from Tara and her mother. Although they were all departing on the same day, they had opted for different flights and bid their farewells at the airport. The goodbyes seemed normal at first, but when Tara started texting a friend, things quickly escalated. In a shocking twist, Pater appeared out of nowhere, consumed by anger and suspecting Tara of being unfaithful. This led to a heated confrontation, and Tara's attempt to escape turned into a chilling chase through the airport. Airport security guards had to intervene to separate the couple, although no arrests were made. After this intense encounter, the situation reached a boiling point. Tara hoped for some normalcy as she headed home, but things took a terrifying turn. Later that same day, Tara returned to the home she shared with Pedia to pack her belongings. However, Pedia, fueled by rage, suddenly arrived home and forcefully entered the house. The argument quickly escalated and turned physical as he pushed and cornered her. The once shared home became a battlefield. Pedia shouted and demanded that Tara move out, denying her access to their daughter. Yet he wouldn't allow her to leave either. He took control by cutting off her contact with the outside world, using her phone to drain her bank account and send deceitful messages to her loved ones, trying to portray himself as the victim and Tara as the wrongdoer. Pedia was relentless in his efforts to convince everyone of his twisted version of the truth, even going as far as trying to turn everyone Tara knew against her by claiming she was involved with another man. Using Tara's cell phone, Pater conducted a transfer of funds from her account to his own and deceitfully utilized a Facebook account to send messages to her friends and employer, falsely confessing to her actions. However, the truth remained that she had not engaged in any such activities. Days later, displaying a complete lack of empathy, he heartlessly evicted Tara from their shared residence, callously denying her the right to take their daughter with her. In a shocking turn of events, he even entrusted the care of their child to his aunt, while demanding irrefutable evidence that Tara was not in the child's presence. Over the course of the following days, Tara sought solace in confiding in her boss at the law firm where she was employed, desperately seeking safety. With unwavering support from her boss, she took a crucial step towards securing sole custody of her daughter and forging a life free from the clutches of her abusive partner. Finding refuge in a safe house, she stayed with a friend, yearning for a fresh start and determined to reclaim her life, establish stability for her daughter, and finally break free from the shackles of her past. During this time, Tora collaborated with her boss to prepare an application for sole custody of their daughter, while simultaneously devising plans for her new life. However, fully aware of Pater's untrustworthiness, she reached out to the Gold Coast police to obtain a domestic violence protection order. Unfortunately, Her concerns were dismissed as the police had encountered numerous instances where women had made false allegations in order to gain an advantage in family court proceedings. On September 3, 2015, Tara visited the Southport police station, having arranged for a private room through her lawyer. Gripped by fear of Petya, she hoped for a receptive audience at the station. However, the situation did not unfold as anticipated. The police refused to provide a private room, and the officer at the reception displayed a disinterest in hearing their account, despite Tara possessing text messages that clearly demonstrated Petya's threats. After consulting with the surgeon, the police concluded that there was insufficient evidence to substantiate claims of domestic violence. Although Tara did not receive assistance at the police station, a glimmer of hope awaited her just beyond the horizon. On Monday, September 7, 2015, the turning point in Tara's custody battle occurred when the legal documents were delivered to Petya's attorney. This resulted in Tara obtaining sole custody of her 3-year-old daughter. Little did anyone anticipate that this event would trigger a drastic change in Petya's behavior. Despite the existence of a protection order meant to keep him away, Petya relentlessly pursued Tara, disregarding the law. Unaware of the imminent danger, Tara left her aunt's house on the fateful morning of Tuesday, September 8, 2015, to drop off her daughter at daycare. If only she had known that Pater had already contacted the daycare half an hour earlier to inquire about their daughter's schedule. After safely dropping off her child and driving away in her Mazda, Tara felt a sense of relief. However, in a horrifying twist, Pater suddenly appeared in his menacing black SUV, closely tailing her. Gripped by fear, Tara urgently dialed emergency services, expressing her belief that he intended to harm her. At an intersection, trapped by a red traffic light, Pater closed in on her, aggressively pounding on the glass and demanding that she exit the vehicle. A glimmer of hope emerged as the light changed, allowing Tara to accelerate and escape his clutches. Nevertheless, undeterred, Pater continued to pursue her. Tara's desperate pleas for assistance filled the air, her panic escalating. As she urgently relayed her location to the police, imploring them to come to her aid. Shockingly, Petya then forced his own girlfriend off the road and brutally attacked her with a 7.8 kilograms methyl fire hydrant cover, resulting in her tragic death within the overturned vehicle. Disturbing CCTV footage later emerged, capturing Petya grabbing the lethal fire hydrant cover and charging towards Taro's car. This chilling scene provided a glimpse into the unimaginable violence that ensued. Amidst these dark moments, a neighbor named Lisa Kennedy managed to capture the lead-up to this abhorrent act on her own CCTV system. Witnessing the tragic events unfold before her eyes, she hurriedly made her way down the driveway, letting out piercing screams and desperately attempting to come to Tara's aid. She recounted her frantic efforts to intervene, pleading for assistance and shouting at Petya. In a cruel twist of fate, other neighbors, unaware of Petya's sinister intentions, rushed to the scene of the overturned, assuming he was there to offer help. They unknowingly assisted him in breaking one of the car windows, completely unaware of the unimaginable tragedy that had just occurred. It was only upon hearing Tara's cries that they realized the horrifying truth. Petya was there to inflict harm. Petya mercilessly fought off those who tried to intervene, leaving the community shattered and grappling with the brutal reality of domestic violence. On September 8, 2015, Lionel Petya turned himself in to the police approximately 30 minutes after he had taken Tara Brown's life. In 2017, he pleaded guilty to her murder and was subsequently sentenced to 20 years in prison. Once a member of the Bandito biker gang, Lionel Pater faced the unwavering hand of justice as he received a life sentence for the savage murder of Tara Brown on the Gold Coast. Dressed in a somber black suit and black tie, his wrists bound in handcuffs, Pater remained stoic as Natalie Hinton, Tara's mother, addressed the court, labeling him a monster for robbing her daughter of her life. Vividly portrayed Tara as a kind-hearted and trusting individual who cherished life from a young age. According to Hinton, Pater consistently sought validation from Tara and employed insidious tactics of domestic violence, such as gaslighting, to erode her self-esteem. In her eyes, Tara became trapped in a life of fear under the control of this monstrous presence. Natalie Hinton, Tara's mother, wept silently as she listened to the details of Pater's brutal assault on her daughter, pushing away anyone who tried to intervene. "I had no idea of the extent of his sickening actions," she expressed. "My entire world crumbled around me as this misogynistic narcissist took the life of my precious girl. There were numerous indications of his violent behavior, yet no one was able to recognize and take decisive action against him in a timely manner. Initially, the police officers failed to comprehend the severity of her situation just days before her tragic demise, resulting in their inability to save her life. Queensland Health also made grave errors by neglecting to address Tara's relationship anxiety during subsequent visits, despite her mentioning it during a prenatal appointment. Furthermore, during the birth, the hospital staff overheard Pettia making threats towards Tara's mother. Yet, they allowed him to remain present and did not alert the authorities, despite being aware of the domestic violence protection order prohibiting his presence. Finally, Justice Diber Mullins, while delivering a life imprisonment sentence for Pettia's conviction, expressed a desire for him to understand the profound impact of Tara's death, a pain that cannot be adequately expressed in words. Pettia acknowledged his guilt with the full support of his family, who encouraged him to face the consequences of his actions. In a statement read by Solicitor Campbell McCallum outside the court, Pettia expressed his remorse and his desire to spare Tara's family any further anguish. He accepted the punishment imposed by the justice system and acknowledged that he would ultimately be judged by a higher power. Pater acknowledged that Tara's memory would endure and that he would never be forgiven. He hoped that by accepting responsibility, he could prevent any additional pain and suffering for Tara's family. Today, we examine the tragic case of Tara Brown, a young mother whose life was tragically cut short due to domestic violence inflicted by her former partner, Liminal Pater. Tara's story highlights the urgent need for a more effective response to domestic violence cases and the necessity for comprehensive training within law enforcement agencies. The police's failure to acknowledge the threat and respond appropriately is a somber indication of the deep-rooted flaws within our system. In honor of Tara Brown and the numerous victims of domestic violence, let us endeavor to create a society where such heartbreaking incidents are eradicated. Education, awareness, and a united endeavor are pivotal in effecting change and guaranteeing the security and welfare of everyone. If you or someone you know of is enduring domestic violence, please seek assistance as you are not alone. Together, we can bring about a transformation and put an end to the cycle of violence. Lynette Joy Sims was born in New South Wales, Australia in 1948. In 1965, she met Chris Dawson at a high school function. The pair got married in 1970 at St. Jude's Church, Randwick, in Sydney and later had 2 children. Chris and his twin brother Paul played professional rugby league football for the next few years. After ending their rugby careers, the Dawson brothers found employment as physical education teachers. Chris worked at Cromer High School near Sydney. Both Chris and Paul are alleged to have regularly engaged in illicit behavior with female students at their respective schools. In 1981, Chris groomed and slept with a student named Joanne Curtis. Joanne temporarily moved into the Dawson family residence in Bayview in 1982. Chris told Lynette about Joanne's problems at her home with her family as a reason as to why she had to stay at their house. Chris was 32 years old then and Joanne was 16. Lynette was phoned by her mom on January 8, 1982. This was the last time they would communicate with each other. She planned to meet her mother and family at the North Bridge Baths the following day, but never arrived. Chris didn't report his wife missing until February 18, 1982, 6 weeks after she had vanished. Joanne then permanently moved in with Chris. When questioned by investigators, Chris said that Lynette left after marital problems caused over her spending. Later, Chris suggested that she had joined a religious organization. In 1983, he finalized divorce proceedings against Lynette and married Joanne Curtis the following year. Some investigators believe that Chris took Lynette's life, but that was hard to prove without a body. The first inquest held in February of 2001. The deputy state coroner Jan Stevenson determined that Lynette is not alive anymore and that the person responsible was someone she knew. A second inquest held in February 2003 by State Coroner Karl Milanovanovich recommended that Chris be charged with ending Lynette's life. The New South Wales Director of Public Prosecutions, Nicholas Cowdery, refused to prosecute Chris Dawson, citing the lack of evidence. In April of 2018, following extensive investigations, New South Wales Police requested the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions to review its brief of evidence. Then, in December 2018, Chris Dawson was arrested in Queensland in connection to Lynette's case. Dawson still claimed he was innocent and delayed the trial several times because, according to him, there was a risk that members of the jury could have prejudged his guilt due to widespread publicity about the case. In May of 2022, Justice Robert Beach-Jones granted Dawson's application for a judge-alone trial after he argued the extensive pretrial publicity meant a jury was unsuitable in his case. The trial began on May 9th. The prosecution claimed that Dawson took Lynette's life because of his desire for an unfettered relationship with Joanne Curtis. The defense acknowledged that Dawson may have failed his wife, but that she had left and abandoned the family of her own accord and suggested she may have created a new life. The defense relied on a number of witnesses who claimed to have seen Lynette since her disappearance. On August 30th, 2022, Justice Harrison found 74-year-old Chris Dawson guilty, and he delivered his reasons as well. He found Dawson had lied on a number of occasions, including about his relationship with Joanne, about his desire to resume a relationship with his wife, and about receiving phone calls from Lynette after she disappeared. Justice Harris rejected the alleged sightings of Lynette as wholly unreliable and found there was a most compelling body of evidence to reject the hypothesis that Lynette Dawson abandoned her family. He was satisfied beyond reasonable doubt that Lynette Dawson is not alive anymore as a result of a conscious and voluntary act by Chris Dawson. On November 23, 2008, hunters came across the remains of a young woman frozen in a shallow creek in the rural area of Fond du Lac County, Wisconsin. The remains were found on private property near an abandoned farm, partially submerged in the shallow creek on Skyline Drive in Ashford, Wisconsin. Investigators were forced to extract the body by chiseling away the ice, and once removed, scuba divers were brought in to search the bottom for evidence. They found some articles of clothing, including a strapless Zoe Beth brand black and pink top with a pink bow determined to have come from Family Dollar, where it had been available in the spring of 2008. The underclothing that she wore, also from Family Dollar, was shipped only between July 1st and July 15th, 2008. The victim's socks or shoes were not found at the scene. In the water, investigators found a medal of Saint Benedict, but it was not known if it was related to her. Her cause of death was inconclusive, but the manner of death was believed to be a homicide. Although the body was found in late autumn, she had actually died in the summer 2 to 4 months earlier. This was established by examining traces from insects that were found on the remains. She had an overbite, and some fillings and dental sealants were found on the upper molars. She was believed to be a Caucasian between 15 and 21 years old, but examiners could not be sure. Other physical characteristics included a healed rib fracture and being pigeon-toed or knock-kneed, which may have been noticeable when she walked as her feet were slanted inward. To obtain DNA information, her femur was transported to the University of Texas. Her DNA was entered into the National DNA Database, and dental records were created that could be compared to those of reported missing persons. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children would have a computer-generated reconstruction created of the victim by using mortuary photographs and a CT scan of the skull that were submitted to the center. The reconstruction of the victim generated over 200 tips but did not produce any solid leads, as the composite apparently resembled a large number of missing people. For 3 years, she remained at the medical examiner's office waiting for investigators to give her a name. In December 2011, her body was laid to rest at Cattaraugus Cemetery in a public ceremony, and then the case would officially go cold. In April 2018, a revised reconstruction was released, and authorities announced that the victim would be exempt for isotope testing and DNA phenotyping to determine geographical locations where she may have lived and to develop a clear estimation of her ethnicity and physical characteristics. Genetic genealogy would also be used to locate individuals biologically related to her. Bone, tooth, and hair samples were sent to numerous labs throughout the country that specialize in various forms of forensic analysis. Months later, the results indicated that the Jane Doe had likely spent most of her life in the southwestern United States, possibly in Arizona or New Mexico. She had lived in the Midwest, perhaps in southwestern Wisconsin, northern Iowa, or southern Minnesota for less than a year preceding her death. After genealogy research helped identify family members, her DNA was compared to her mother and sister. Her identity was finally announced on November 23, 2021, 13 years to the day that she was found. Amy Marie Yeary was born December 9, 1989, and was originally from Rockford, Illinois. She came from a broken home, and she and her siblings were split up, and Amy went to live with her grandmother in Illinois. About 2015, her siblings were searching for her and started a Facebook page dedicated to finding Amy. She would have been 18 years old when she died in 2008. It was also learned that she spent time in Milwaukee, Chicago, and Beloit, Wisconsin in the weeks preceding her death. While speaking with her mother, detectives learned that Amy had made a phone call to her mother from Beloit in 2008, saying she wanted a ride home. Her mother, who lived in northern Illinois at the time, could not give her a ride due to car trouble. She became angry at her mother and said she was in trouble, and then she was never heard from again. A missing persons report was never filed, but the family had hoped to make contact with Amy on their own. She was oftentimes transient, and it is believed that she was a victim of human trafficking. Although Amy now has her name back, the sheriff's office says there's still work that needs to be done to determine how and why Amy lost her life, and ask anyone that knows anything about the case to come forward. At the age of 16, Bryant attended Western High School in Las Vegas, Nevada. On January 26, 1979, she went to the school to register for sophomore classes and then to the Dairy Queen across the street with a friend. While standing outside the restaurant, Kim and her friend were verbally accosted by two young men driving a 1955 to 57 Chevy with silver primer paint and light spots. Words were exchanged, and the men in the Chevy sped off down Decatur Boulevard. The men in the Chevy had also tried to entice other girls from Western High School into their car earlier in the week. Police were able to create a sketch of the passenger, who was described as about 18 years old with scraggly blonde hair, and the driver was in his early 20s with medium brown hair and possibly had a mustache. At 10 a.m., she would call her boyfriend to come pick her up from the Dairy Queen. By 10 a.m., Kim's friend had been picked up by her parents. When her boyfriend arrived around 10:45 a.m., Kim was nowhere to be found. Strangely, he would wait 4 days before reporting this to authorities. At about noon on the day she disappeared, a passing motorist spotted a backpack in the center median on North Decatur Boulevard, which ran between the school and the Dairy Queen. Inside the bag was Kim's ID and belongings. Kim's mother, Sherry Elliott, and stepfather Edward Elliott attempted to file a missing persons report when she didn't return home from school that day. But police, who suspected she had run away from home, did not declare her missing until January 31st. This was only after learning her book bag had been found discarded in the median of a nearby roadway. On February 20th, 1979, a month later, her body was found by three young boys in a desert area near West Charleston Boulevard and South Buffalo Drive. She had been sexually assaulted and killed, and DNA evidence from a suspect was recovered, but police were unable to make an identification and the case would go cold. There have been a few theories over the years as to who could have been responsible for her death. Stephen Morin, who was a Vegas serial killer during the time of her murder, was identified as the man that took Kim on a date to a skating rink about 2 weeks before she disappeared. Also, a macrame belt similar to the one Kim was wearing the day she disappeared was found in a storage unit owned by Morin. And Moran was believed to be responsible for the rape and attempted murder of a 15-year-old Vegas girl in April of 1980, and that girl had been left at the same site where Kim's body was found. However, the head of the Metro Homicide Unit noted that other young women were found murdered in the desert under similar circumstances as Kim after Moran's arrest. Another possible suspect was Bobby Jean Thomas, who was a local Vegas roofer that had been convicted for attempting to assault a woman in 1970. He was convicted of statutory rape and avoided a manslaughter charge as part of a plea deal in relation to the death of his 14-year-old sister-in-law. Thomas was killed the day after Kim went missing. Ronnie Lee Fain, a career criminal from California that recently moved to Vegas, was arrested for his murder. Fain told police he murdered Thomas in a fit of rage after he confessed to the murder of Kim. Fain passed 2 polygraph exams and his guilty plea was accepted. But Fain later tried to withdraw his confession, and some detectives were suspicious of the fact Fain didn't even know Kim's name until he was told it by his defense attorney. And Fain had stabbed another Vegas man to death only a month before the Thomas killing. Most concerning, the detective heading the Thomas investigation said eyewitnesses reported Kim was last seen alive in a vehicle with 4 men, meaning that even with Thomas's death, 3 suspects remained on the loose. Then, in 2008, an attempt was made to create a DNA profile from the suspect's semen. Following advances in technology in 2021, DNA from different items of evidence were sent to Othram Incorporated for testing using a financial donation from Las Vegas resident and philanthropist Justin Wu. A male DNA profile was obtained and entered into Cody's, but there were no hits. That's when genetic genealogists built a family tree of the unknown killer, which ultimately led them to Johnny Blake Peterson. Othram and police eventually narrowed the search to a relative of Peterson, who was willing to give a DNA sample. It was then concluded in November 2021, 42 years after the murder, that Peterson was the person that kidnapped, sexually assaulted, and murdered Kim. Peterson was a 19-year-old Las Vegas resident at the time of Kim's death. He had previously attended the same school as Kim and would have been 3 years her senior, although it is unclear if they had interacted. He had a 1980 arrest for rape in Las Vegas, but the charges were later dismissed. He was never even on the radar as a suspect for her murder and had died in January 1993. Sadly, Kim's mother, Sherry Elliott, passed away in June of 2020 at the age of 79 before her daughter's killer was named. On July 21, 1999, a female's bruised body was found at 6:15 a.m. within the first rows of a cornfield by a father and his 16-year-old daughter walking their dogs. The body was located along 92nd Street in a rural area of Racine County, Wisconsin, in the town of Raymond. It appeared she had undergone neglect and abuse, which had increased in the days before her death. She also appeared to have been sexually assaulted and had only been deceased for several hours before being found. Her teeth showed signs of long-term neglect, with multiple teeth missing and other showing signs of decay. Her right arm was bent unnaturally behind her and she had multiple obvious injuries. She had a cauliflower deformity on her right ear that may have come from repeated abuse. It was believed that she was possibly cognitively disabled and was believed to be between the age of 18 and 35 years old. When found, she was wearing a man's gray and silver country and western shirt with snap buttons and embroidered with red flowers on the front of the shirt, along with black sweatpants and no shoes. The shirt was produced and distributed throughout the U.S. about 15 years prior in 1984. During the autopsy, it was determined she had endured long-term abuse, was malnourished, and suffered from an untreated infection in her left elbow. Over 50 people attended her funeral on October 27, 1999, in Caledonia, Wisconsin. Her gravestone read, "Daughter Jane Doe," along with the dates of discovery and burial, with the phrase, "Gone but not forgotten." Multiple reconstructions were created of her face to assist with visual identification of the body. In 2012, a revised reconstruction was created by Namas, replacing their original. In October 2013, her remains were exhumed for additional testing. At a press conference that same year, police would describe the abuse she endured as barbaric and something none of them would ever forget. It was announced on July 19, 2015, that the examination of her remains had been completed and they would be reburied on the 16th anniversary of her discovery. Authorities stated they had indeed uncovered new leads from the exhumation, but they declined to state any details. In 2016, it was announced that the chemical isotope analysis indicated the victim may have spent time in Alaska, Montana, or southern Canada. The police department then planned on seeking forensic genetic genealogy organizations to identify potential relatives of the victim. In November 2019, authorities in Racine County announced that she was successfully identified after 2 decades. Shockingly, during the conference, they also announced a suspect in her murder. They announced that the remains of the victim belonged to Peggy Lynn Johnson, and the suspect was in custody. The announcement stated that both the victim and the individual in custody have substantial ties to a northwestern Chicago suburb. Peggy was born March 4, 1976, and was 23 years old from McHenry, Illinois. Her accused killer was identified as now 66-year-old nurse Linda Sue LaRoche. LaRoche owned her own nursing practice established in 1997, which provided health care to at least 2 Illinois correctional facilities without displaying any questionable or inadequate behavior. Her family never reported her missing, although an aunt had placed a personal ad in a December 1999 issue of Northwest Herald requesting Peggy to contact her. However, unbeknownst at the time, her body had been found 5 months prior. She had never been formally reported as missing, and that is likely because she was living with the woman accused of killing her. Peggy Johnson's name was not known in Racine County. Several of the people who knew her in life didn't know her by that name either. Peggy's mother's name was Diane Schroeder, hence the name Peggy Schroeder. Her father, Scott Johnson, wasn't in the picture and is deceased. Her mother, Diane, had died on November 26, 1994 at the age of 41. She worked at a nursing home and had 2 kids, Peggy and a son named Jesse, who died in 1998. A neighbor of Peggy's and fellow student of hers at Harvard High School in Harvard, Illinois named Amanda recently found out about the discovery and stated that Peggy was the sweetest girl. She never ever would hurt a fly. She said Peggy fell off the radar in the fall of 1994 when her mother passed away. It appears she went to live with LaRoche following her mother's death as a vulnerable young woman with no one to care for her. Another friend of Peggy's noticed something was amiss around the time, but didn't have reason to suspect Peggy had been killed. Nicole was 9 when she first met Peggy and visited her once at the LaRoches soon after Peggy moved into their home in McHenry, Illinois. She said Peggy seemed happy and finally had a job and stability, taking care of LaRoche's kids and home, something she didn't have growing up in a low-income family. She said she tried calling Peggy repeatedly over the next couple years, but never got a call back. So around the summer of 2000, she stopped by the house and unbeknownst to her, Peggy had already been dead for about a year. LaRoche answered the door and told Nicole that Peggy was a runaway and hadn't been heard from. Nicole and another childhood friend, Kimberly, both remember Peggy as being not all that different from other kids her age. She was a year behind in school and sometimes took a little bit longer to learn something, but was still accepted by many of her peers and had friends to stand up for her when bullies came around. LaRoche was arrested on November 5, 2019 in Cape Coral. She reportedly confessed to killing someone while living in Illinois to various people, one of whom alerted police in September of 2019. According to a criminal complaint, LaRoche was charged with first-degree intentional homicide and concealment of a corpse. Authorities state the maximum penalty would be life in prison. At the time she was charged with murdering Peggy, she was facing legal proceedings after causing a vehicle accident while intoxicated. Peggy was reportedly last seen by classmates at a 1994 homecoming dance in Harvard, Illinois. The victim and her accused killer first encountered each other in 1994 at a medical clinic where Peggy worked. She became homeless at age 18 after her mother's death, as her brother and father were also deceased. The emotional and physical abuse against Peggy took place over a significant period of time before her death, presumably since moving into the home. As indicated by the autopsy, she was subjected to a poor living environment and was not well nourished. Instances of LaRoche's abuse toward Peggy were confirmed by her children, one of which Peggy had confided in after being asked about a bruise to the face. Despite friends and classmates of Peggy describing her as mild-mannered and quiet, LaRoche claimed Peggy repeatedly stole from her, including medication, and invited males over without permission. The primary witnesses to her alleged abuse of Peggy include her ex-husband and grandchildren. LaRoche's now ex-husband stated he had come home in July 1999 to find Peggy deceased on the floor, and LaRoche claimed it was due to an overdose. LaRoche allegedly claimed Peggy had overdosed on pills and instructed her then-husband to take their children away for an outing so she could dispose of the body. The ex-husband claimed LaRoche left with the body, and when she returned 2.5 hours later, she no longer had the body. LaRoche claimed that she regained consciousness and she dropped her off at her grandmother's house. Peggy's grandmother denied ever meeting members of the LaRoche family, let alone seeing Peggy on the day in question. And another alleged story she gave her then-husband was that she abandoned Peggy unharmed along a roadway in Wisconsin. Paramedics were not called and LaRoche did not provide medical assistance to her despite being a nurse. However, the autopsy of her body disputed the alleged overdose as toxicology tests were clear. LaRoche first appeared in court on January 9, 2020 for a preliminary hearing. However, the hearing was adjourned due to the fact that LaRoche did not have an attorney. Her trial was set for February 2020, but was postponed until April 2021 so she could get an attorney. However, it was then postponed indefinitely due to the COVID-19 pandemic. In October 2021, the prosecutor said in court that she intends to introduce evidence that would show LaRoche hated Peggy because she believed her husband had an affair with a young nanny. However, her attorney argued, without physical evidence, the state would essentially be asking the jury to convict her based on the stories told by her 5 now-adult children and ex-husband. Peggy lived in the LaRoche home from 1994 to the time of her death in 1999. According to the criminal complaint, LaRoche's children recalled that Peggy often had signs of injuries caused by LaRoche. She was forced to sleep in a crawl space under the house, and that LaRoche was verbally and emotionally cruel to her and often screamed at her like an animal. It is unknown if her ex-husband will face any charges for not calling 911. On March 4, 2020, Peggy Lynn Johnson was laid to rest on her birthday next to her mother and grandparents at Highland Garden of Memories in Belvidere, Illinois, with a new headstone bearing her name. LaRoche remains in Racine County Jail, awaiting trial scheduled to begin on February 1, 2022. Although this case is not yet officially solved, Peggy now has her name back in a proper burial, and hopefully her killer will soon face justice. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.